The conference room was silent except for the scratch of my pen on paper. $2 million. I signed my name, Clara Bennett, on the final page and slid it across the mahogany table. Across from me, Tom's face had gone the color of old newspaper. His lawyer leaned over, whispering something urgent, but Tom just sat there, frozen, watching his entire world collapse with each stroke of my signature. 3 months earlier, I wouldn't have believed this moment was possible. It was a Tuesday morning in our Chicago brownstone when Tom first suggested I was losing my mind. I was standing in our kitchen, the one with the marble counters I'd picked out myself 15 years ago, holding our bank statement. The numbers didn't make sense. There were transfers I didn't recognize, amounts that seemed to evaporate into thin air. The kitchen smelled of Tom's expensive French roast coffee, the kind he insisted on buying from that boutique roaster in Lincoln Park. $28 a pound, but he said it was worth it. Now I wondered what else he thought was worth it when it came to spending our money. The morning light filtered through the bay windows, casting long shadows across the papers spread on our island, papers that told a story I couldn't quite piece together. "Tom," I called out, my voice echoing through the house, "can you explain these withdrawals?" He appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand, wearing that patient smile he'd perfected over our 38 years of marriage. The smile that said he loved me, but also that I was being difficult. He was wearing his favorite cardigan, the gray cashmere one I'd bought him for his 60th birthday. He looked comfortable, relaxed, like a man without a care in the world. "Sweetheart, we talked about this last week. Don't you remember?" His tone was gentle, the way you'd speak to a confused child. "Those are the investment transfers for the new portfolio." I frowned. We'd talked about it? I searched my memory, coming up empty. But lately, there had been moments like this, conversations I supposedly had but couldn't recall, decisions I'd apparently made but had no recollection of making. The harder I tried to remember, the more elusive the memories became, like trying to grasp smoke. "I don't remember that conversation," I admitted, hating how uncertain my voice sounded. My hands trembled slightly as I held the paper, and I hated that too, hated showing weakness, hated the doubt creeping into my mind. Tom set down his coffee and walked over, placing his hands on my shoulders. His touch was warm, familiar, but there was something in his grip that felt almost possessive. "Clara, honey, this is exactly what I've been worried about. You've been so forgetful lately. Just last week you couldn't remember where you put your car keys, and the week before you forgot about our dinner with the Hendersons." The thing was, he was right about those incidents. I had forgotten where I'd put my keys, found them eventually in my coat pocket, though I could have sworn I'd left them on the hook by the door. I had double-booked that dinner, writing it in my calendar for the wrong Thursday. At 62, maybe these little slips were normal. Maybe I was just stressed, or maybe something worse was happening. "Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison," Tom continued, his voice dripping with concern. He squeezed my shoulders, and I felt the weight of his worry, or what I thought was worry. "Just to be safe. You know, my mother started showing signs of dementia around your age." The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Dementia. My breath caught in my throat. Tom's mother had spent her last 5 years in a memory care facility, unable to recognize her own son. The thought of following that same path terrified me more than I wanted to admit. "I'm not your mother," I said, but even I could hear the lack of conviction in my voice. My words came out thin, reedy, like they were being spoken by someone else. "Of course not," he soothed, pulling me into a hug. I could smell his cologne, Acqua di Parma, another expensive habit. "I'm just saying, it wouldn't hurt to get checked out. And in the meantime, why don't you let me handle the finances, just until we figure out what's going on? I don't want you to stress about it." Looking back now, I can see exactly what he was doing. But in that moment, standing in my kitchen with the morning light streaming through the windows and my husband's arms around me, I just felt relief. Relief that someone was willing to take this burden off my shoulders. Relief that I didn't have to admit I was confused and scared, Relief that I could pretend, for just a little while longer, that everything was fine. "Okay," I whispered. "That makes sense." Tom kissed my forehead, and I felt the soft brush of his lips against my skin. "It's going to be fine, sweetheart. I'm taking care of everything. I know you're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me I should have seen through it. But love isn't blind. It's paralyzed. It makes you trust when you should question. It makes you believe when you should investigate. It makes you ignore the small voice in the back of your mind that's whispering that something isn't right." That afternoon, I went to lunch with my daughter Sarah at a little cafe on Michigan Avenue. At 34, she'd inherited Tom's sharp features and my stubbornness. She was a corporate lawyer, brilliant and successful, and she immediately noticed something was wrong. The cafe was one of our regular spots, a cozy place with exposed brick walls and mismatched vintage furniture. Sarah had already ordered her usual iced tea by the time I arrived. She was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She looked every inch the successful attorney, and I felt a surge of pride mixed with something else. A wish that I could tell her everything, mixed with shame that I had anything to tell. "Mom, you seem distracted," she said, setting down her iced tea. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, my fingers playing with the menu I'd already memorized. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, about the bank statements, about Tom's suggestion that I was losing my memory. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades protecting our family's image of perfection, held back. What would she think of me? Would she see me differently? Would she look at me with the same pity I'd seen in Tom's eyes? "Just tired," I lied. "Your father and I have been so busy with the business." Sarah's eyes narrowed, those sharp eyes that could spot a weak argument from a mile away. "The real estate business? I thought Dad was handling most of that now." "He is," I said quickly, too quickly. I could feel my face heating up, the way it always did when I wasn't being entirely truthful. "I mean, we're both involved, but he's taken on more of the day-to-day operations." My daughter studied me for a long moment, and I could see the lawyer in her analyzing every word, every gesture. Her eyes tracked from my face to my hands, which were now gripping the menu so tightly my knuckles had gone white. But then she smiled and changed the subject to her upcoming vacation in Colorado, and I felt myself relax. We ordered. I got my usual Caesar salad, though I could barely taste it when it arrived. Sarah talked about her plans to go skiing, about a case she was working on involving a corporate merger. I nodded and made the appropriate responses, but my mind was elsewhere, circling back to those bank statements and Tom's too convenient explanation. "Mom?" Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're doing it again. Where did you go just now?" "I'm sorry, honey," I said, forcing myself to focus. "What were you saying about the merger?" She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem, I don't know, not yourself lately." The irony of her words hit me like a physical blow. Not myself. If only she knew how true that was, how I'd been feeling like a stranger in my own skin for weeks now. "I'm fine," I lied again, and this time it was easier. Practice makes perfect, after all. Really, just tired. Over the next few weeks, Tom's narrative about my failing memory became more elaborate. At a dinner party with our closest friends, the Caldwells and the Pattersons, he told a story about how I'd gotten lost driving home from the grocery store. We were sitting in the Pattersons' dining room, a space I'd been in dozens of times over the years. Janet had made her famous beef Wellington, and the table was set with her good china, the Wedgwood pattern she'd inherited from her mother. Everything was elegant, refined, exactly the kind of evening we'd enjoyed countless times before. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was about to become the entertainment. "She called me in a panic," Tom said, shaking his head with exaggerated concern. He had the attention of the entire table, and he was playing it like a violin. "Couldn't remember how to get back to our own house. She'd lived in Chicago her entire life, and she was lost 3 blocks from home." Everyone made sympathetic noises. Janet Patterson reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her fingers soft and warm. Her eyes were full of concern, and I saw myself reflected there, not as a friend, but as a problem to be pitied. Oh, Clara, that must have been so frightening. The thing was, it had never happened. I'd never gotten lost. I'd never called Tom in a panic. But there he was, telling the story with such conviction, such detail, that even I started to wonder if maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I'd blocked it out, the way traumatic memories sometimes disappear. Around the table, faces I'd known for decades looked at me with varying degrees of concern and pity. Robert Caldwell cleared his throat uncomfortably. His wife, Patricia, wouldn't meet my eyes. I could feel the shift in the room, the subtle recalibration of how they saw me. I was no longer Clara, their friend and equal. I was becoming Clara, the woman who was losing her mind. "Tom, that's not," I began, but he cut me off. "Sweetheart, I know it's embarrassing to talk about, but these are our friends. They care about you. They want to help." And there it was again, that gentle, patronizing tone that made me feel small and confused. His hand covered mine on the table, squeezing just a little too hard. A warning disguised as comfort. I looked around the table at faces I'd known for decades, and I saw pity in their eyes. Pity and something else. Belief. They believed him. I excused myself to the bathroom, pushing my chair back with more force than necessary. The hallway to the powder room was decorated with family photos. The Pattersons' children, now grown and moved away, smiling from frames on the wall. Young faces full of promise and possibility. I wondered if any of them would end up like me, doubting their own reality. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, gripping the sink. The woman staring back at me looked tired, older than her 62 years. When had the lines around my eyes gotten so deep? When had my hair become more silver than brown? The overhead light was harsh, unforgiving, highlighting every flaw and imperfection. My lipstick had worn off during dinner, and without it, my lips looked thin and pale. My eyes, once bright blue, seemed faded, uncertain. "You're not crazy," I whispered to my reflection. But the words felt hollow, like they were bouncing off the mirror instead of sinking in. The woman in the reflection looked back at me with doubt in her eyes, and I realized with a jolt that I didn't recognize her anymore. When had I become this person, this uncertain, frightened shadow? I splashed cold water on my face, letting the shock of it ground me in the present moment. The water was bracingly cold, and for just a second, my mind felt clear. But then I heard laughter from the dining room, Tom's laughter, warm and hearty, and the clarity dissolved. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved on. They were talking about the latest scandal at the country club, something about the treasurer and misappropriated funds. The irony wasn't lost on me, though no one else seemed to notice. Tom welcomed me back with a smile and a gentle hand on my shoulder, the perfect concerned husband. That night, lying in bed next to my husband of 38 years, I listened to him breathe. In the darkness, I couldn't see his face, couldn't see that patient smile or the concern in his eyes. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of his breathing, and all I could feel was the growing distance between us. The bed we'd shared for nearly 4 decades suddenly felt too small and too large at the same time. Tom was lying on his side of the mattress, an invisible line drawn down the middle that we rarely crossed anymore. When had that happened? When had we stopped reaching for each other in the night? When had companionship turned into cohabitation? I stared at the ceiling, watching the play of shadows from the streetlights outside. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor, facing the street, and I could hear the occasional car passing by, the distant sound of the city that never quite slept. Chicago had been my home for my entire life, but tonight it felt foreign, like I was a visitor in someone else's city, someone else's life. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own life? Like you're watching yourself from the outside, powerless to change what's happening? That's what those weeks felt like. Every day, Tom would mention something I'd supposedly forgotten, some conversation we'd apparently had. and every day I felt a little more of myself slip away. The mornings were the worst. I'd wake up with Tom already showered and dressed, brewing his expensive coffee, and he'd casually mention something we'd supposedly discussed the night before. Remember what we talked about last night? About refinancing the Lincoln Park property? And I'd search my memory, coming up empty, wondering if I'd somehow had entire conversations in my sleep. I started keeping a journal, hiding it in my nightstand drawer. Every night, I'd write down what had actually happened, what conversations we'd actually had. It was my way of anchoring myself to reality, of proving to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. But then I'd find pages missing, entries I was sure I'd written that were no longer there, and I'd wonder if I'd imagined writing them in the first place. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, and I was cleaning out the hallway closet, something I'd been meaning to do for months. Tom had gone to play golf with his business partners, one of those standing appointments that took up his entire Saturday. He'd left at 7 a.m. sharp, whistling as he loaded his clubs into his Mercedes. I'd watched from the bedroom window as he drove away, the early morning sun glinting off the car's silver paint. The house felt different when he was gone. Quieter, yes, but also lighter somehow, like I could breathe more deeply without him there. I'd made myself a simple breakfast, toast and jam, nothing fancy, and was working on my second cup of coffee when I decided to finally tackle that closet. It was a mess, the way hallway closets always become when you use them as a catch-all for everything that doesn't have a proper place. Winter coats we never wore, boxes of holiday decorations, old sporting equipment from when Sarah was young. I started pulling things out systematically, creating piles: keep, donate, throw away. I was pulling out old coats and boxes of winter accessories when I found it. A shoebox, tucked way in the back behind Tom's old ski boots. It wasn't the box itself that caught my attention. We had dozens of old shoeboxes scattered throughout the house. It was the fact that it was hidden, deliberately pushed to the very back corner where I wouldn't normally look. And it was taped shut, which was odd. Who tapes a shoebox shut? My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The box was heavier than it should be, and I could hear papers shifting inside. For a moment, I just held it, my heart pounding in my chest. Some instinct was screaming at me that whatever was inside this box would change everything. That once I opened it, there would be no going back. I carried it to the kitchen, setting it on the island where I'd been standing just weeks before, confused and uncertain about those bank statements. The morning light was the same, streaming through the bay windows in golden shafts. But I was different now. Or maybe I was about to be. I peeled off the tape slowly, my breath coming in short bursts. Inside were documents, bank statements from accounts I'd never seen before, investment portfolios in Tom's name alone, wire transfer confirmations to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Each document I pulled out was another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. There were statements showing regular transfers, $10,000 here, $15,000 there, always just under the reporting threshold. There were documents for shell companies I'd never heard of. Bennett Holdings, LLC, TB Investments, Cedar Street Properties. My name appeared on some of them as a co-owner, but I'd never signed anything, never even heard these names before. And there, at the bottom of the box, was a notebook. Tom's handwriting covered the pages, dates, amounts, notes about conversations, about me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I sat down hard at the kitchen island, the same spot where I'd stood weeks ago feeling confused and frightened, and began to read. Tuesday, March 12th. Suggested to see that she forgot about Henderson dinner. She accepted this without question. Narrative building successfully. Friday, March 22nd. Told Janet P. about C's supposed episode getting lost. Story spreading through social circle. Credibility established. Monday, April 1st. Transferred another $50 to offshore account. C remains completely unaware of total assets. Thursday, April 11th. C questioned bank statements today. Expressed concern. Planted seeds about memory issues. She's beginning to doubt herself. Excellent progress. Page after page of entries, going back years, years. This wasn't a recent decision or a moment of weakness. This was a long-term, carefully calculated plan to steal our money and destroy my credibility. The notebook fell from my hands, pages scattering across the island. I ran to the sink and vomited, my body rejecting the truth I'd just uncovered. The metallic taste of shock filled my mouth, mixing with the bitter bile. I gripped the edge of the sink, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. When the nausea passed, I rinsed my mouth and turned back to the scattered papers. They were still there, real and damning. I hadn't imagined them. This was happening. This was real. He'd been planning this, systematically, deliberately. Every concerned comment, every worried glance, every story about my failing memory, it had all been calculated. He was gaslighting me, destroying my credibility so thoroughly that no one would believe me if I questioned where our money was going. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, that I couldn't fully process it. This was the man I'd married 38 years ago in a church full of friends and family. The man I'd built a business with, a life with. The man I'd trusted with everything. My heart, my future, my sanity. According to research I'd later discover, over 12,000 elderly victims report being scammed in schemes involving their own family members every year. Investment scams cost seniors over $2 billion annually. I was becoming a statistic, and I hadn't even known I was being conned. I gathered up the papers with shaking hands and put them back in the box exactly as I'd found them. Every document in the same order, the tape resealed as carefully as possible. My mind was racing. I couldn't confront him, not yet. He'd deny it all. Tell me I was confused, tell me I was imagining things, and everyone would believe him because he'd spent months making sure they would. No, confronting him wasn't the answer. I needed proof. I needed witnesses. I needed a plan. But first, I needed to finish cleaning that closet as if nothing had happened. I needed to be the confused, compliant wife Tom expected to find when he came home from golf. I needed to become an actress in my own life, and the role I was playing was my survival. I put the shoebox back exactly where I'd found it, pushed to the back corner behind the ski boots. Then I continued cleaning, mechanically sorting through coats and boxes, my hands moving while my mind spun in circles. By the time Tom came home at 3 p.m., the closet was organized, the donation bags were by the door, and I was in the kitchen making dinner as if it were any other Saturday. That afternoon, when Tom came home from golf, I greeted him with a smile. I asked about his game, listened to his stories about birdies and near misses, and never once let on that my entire world had shifted on its axis. "Shot an 87 today," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. His face was slightly sunburned from the morning on the course, and he looked pleased with himself. "Could have been better, but I 3-putted on the 16th. How was your day, sweetheart?" "Good," I said, my voice steady and calm. Years of hosting dinner parties and making small talk had taught me how to sound pleasant, even when I felt like screaming. I cleaned out the hallway closet. It was quite a mess. He stiffened, just for a second, so quickly I almost missed it. But I was watching him differently now, with new eyes that saw what they'd been missing. "That's great," he said, and I heard the slight tension in his voice. "Find anything interesting?" "Just old coats and boxes of decorations," I replied, turning back to the stove where I was making his favorite pasta dish. "I have 3 bags ready to donate, and I found your old ski boots. I wasn't sure if you wanted to keep those." He relaxed, his shoulders dropping. "Ah, those old things. We should probably donate them too. I haven't been skiing in years." I almost laughed. The ski boots he hadn't worn in years, hiding a box full of evidence of his betrayal. If the situation weren't so devastating, it might have been funny. "You seem better today," he observed, kissing my cheek. His lips were dry, and I resisted the urge to flinch away. "More like your old self." "I feel better," I lied smoothly, stirring the pasta sauce. The tomatoes and garlic smelled rich and familiar, comforting scents that belonged to a life that no longer existed. Maybe you were right about the stress. Maybe I just needed to let go and trust you to handle things. His smile widened, and in that smile, I saw everything. His satisfaction, his confidence, his complete certainty that he'd won. That's my girl. See? Everything's going to be just fine. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over, creating something harder and colder underneath. As I smiled back at him, I felt that transformation beginning. The confused, frightened woman I'd been for the past months was gone. In her place was someone sharper, someone angrier, someone who was done being manipulated. We ate dinner at the dining room table, the one we'd picked out together 20 years ago. Tom told me about his golf game in detail, every hole, every shot, every commentary from his playing partners. I nodded and asked questions in all the right places, played the role of the attentive wife. Inside, I was planning. That night, I lay awake, planning my next move. I couldn't go to Sarah, not yet. Tom had probably already poisoned that well, already planted seeds of doubt about my mental state. I couldn't go to our friends. They'd already chosen to believe his version of events. No, I needed someone outside our circle, someone who could see the situation clearly, someone who had been where I was and survived. The answer came to me at 3 a.m, watching the streetlights cast shadows across our bedroom ceiling. Margaret Chen, our neighbor 2 doors down. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the years, but had never been close. She was younger than me, maybe 55, and had moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago after what I'd heard was a difficult divorce. I'd seen her sometimes, sitting on her front porch with her coffee, and there was something in her eyes that I recognized now. The look of someone who'd been through hell and come out the other side with steel in their spine. I'd heard whispers at neighborhood gatherings, something about her ex-husband hiding assets, about a bitter court battle she'd eventually won. At the time, I'd felt sorry for her, grateful that my marriage wasn't like that. The irony was almost too much to bear. The next morning, I knocked on her door. Margaret answered in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her reading glasses perched on her head. Up close, I could see the laugh lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her black hair. She looked comfortable in her skin in a way I'd forgotten how to be. "Clara," she said, surprised. Behind her, I could see into her house, warm and lived in, with books stacked on every visible surface. "Is everything all right?" "Can I come in?" I asked. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I need to talk to someone, and I think you might understand." She studied me for a moment, and I saw recognition flash in her eyes, not just of me, but of what I was going through. It was the look of someone who'd been where I was standing. "Of course. Coffee?" We sat in her kitchen, which was warm and cluttered in a way my own house never was. Books were stacked on every surface, plants crowded the windowsills, and there was a general sense of comfortable chaos that made me feel like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Her kitchen table was scarred oak, probably a vintage find, covered with a cheerful tablecloth and what looked like research papers. "I'm working on my dissertation," she explained, following my gaze. "Late in life PhD. One of the benefits of divorcing a controlling asshole, you get to finally do what you want." I found myself laughing, a real laugh that felt rusty and strange. "What's your dissertation on?" "Financial abuse in intimate partner relationships," she said, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "Specifically, how women's cognitive abilities are questioned as a control tactic. Fascinating stuff, really, though it hits a bit close to home." The laugh died in my throat. That's oddly specific. "Isn't it, though?" She set a mug in front of me and sat down, her eyes kind but shrewd. "So, Clara, what brings you to my door at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning?" I told her everything. The words poured out of me like I'd been holding them in for years, which in a way I had. I told her about the bank statements, about Tom's suggestions that I was losing my memory, about the dinner party and the lies he'd told. And then I told her about the shoebox, about the notebook with its damning entries, about the careful, calculated plan to gaslight me and steal our money. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing grimmer with each detail. When I finally ran out of words, she reached across the table and took my hand. My ex-husband tried to convince me I was crazy too, Margaret said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She didn't seem shocked or surprised, just sad and knowing. For 3 years, he told me I was paranoid, that I was imagining his affairs, that I was too emotional to handle our finances. He told our friends I was unstable. He told our children I was having a breakdown. He almost succeeded. "What did you do?" I asked, gripping my coffee mug like a lifeline. The ceramic was warm against my palms, grounding. "I documented everything," she said, and now her smile had edges. Every lie, every inconsistency, every time his story changed. I hired a private investigator who caught him with one of his mistresses and confirmed he'd moved over $1 million to accounts I didn't know about. I opened my own bank account that he didn't know about and started squirreling away cash. And then, when I had enough evidence, I took him to court and took him for everything he was worth. She leaned back in her chair, the morning light from her kitchen window creating a halo around her silver-threaded hair. He thought I was weak. He thought I'd just accept whatever he told me, that I was too afraid of being alone to fight back. That was his biggest mistake. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of staying with someone who was erasing me, piece by piece. "I need your help," I said, and the admission felt like both a surrender and a victory. "I can't do this alone." Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, grounding, real. "You're not alone anymore, Clara. Let me tell you exactly what we're going to do." Over the next week, Margaret became my war counsel, my therapist, and my friend. She introduced me to her lawyer, a shark of a woman named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Rebecca's office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and expensive modern art. But Rebecca herself was warm, fierce, and frighteningly competent. Rebecca took one look at the documents I'd photographed from Tom's hidden shoebox and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who just spotted wounded prey. "This is good," she said, spreading the photos across her conference table. "This is really good. The notebook alone is gold, direct evidence of intentional fraud and psychological manipulation. But we need more. We need to know where all the money went, how much there is total, and we need to secure it before he realizes you're onto him." "How do we do that?" I asked. I was sitting in one of her leather conference chairs, feeling both out of my depth and strangely exhilarated. For weeks, I'd felt powerless. Now I was taking action. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "We set a trap. We make him think he's won, that you're completely under his control. And while he's celebrating his victory, we gather everything we need to bury him." She outlined the plan with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. I would continue playing the role of the confused, compliant wife. I'd go to Dr. Morrison for the evaluation Tom had suggested, but instead of going alone, Rebecca would arrange for me to see a specialist who would document my perfect mental health. I'd continue to let Tom control the finances, while Rebecca's team of forensic accountants traced every dollar he'd hidden. "And when we have everything we need," Rebecca said, her smile sharpening, "we strike at a moment of maximum impact. Public humiliation tends to make these narcissistic types crumble beautifully." "There's a charity gala coming up," I mentioned. "The annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. Tom is being honored for his donations." Margaret, who'd come with me to the meeting, lit up. Perfect. Nothing like public humiliation to really drive the point home. But first, I had to be patient. I had to be perfect in my deception, and I had to ignore the voice in my head that kept asking if I was really capable of this level of subterfuge. The answer, it turned out, was yes. When your survival is on the line, you discover capabilities you never knew you had. Tom noticed the change in me, but he interpreted it exactly as I'd hoped he would, as acceptance, as surrender. At dinner parties, I'd laugh along when he told stories about my senior moments. I'd nod sympathetically when he'd explain to friends that he'd taken over our finances to reduce Clara's stress. I'd even started attending a support group for people with memory issues, which Tom thought was wonderful. The support group met every Tuesday evening in the basement of a community center on the North Side. It was run by a professional facilitator named Dr. Yolanda Martinez, and it was full of people genuinely struggling with memory issues. I felt guilty at first, like I was mocking their very real challenges. But Dr. Martinez, who was in on the plan thanks to Rebecca, assured me that my presence was documented evidence of my active engagement with my supposed condition. What Tom didn't know was that after each session, I met with Dr. Martinez privately, and she documented my perfect cognitive function, my clear memory, my complete mental clarity. Every week, she added notes to my file, notes that would become evidence that I had never had any memory issues at all. "You're a natural at this," Margaret told me one afternoon as we reviewed Rebecca's latest findings. We were in her kitchen again, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows and catching dust motes in its beams. Her coffee table was covered with financial documents, each one another piece of the puzzle. "I don't feel in control," I admitted, staring at the numbers that represented my husband's betrayal. "I feel like I'm constantly on the edge of screaming the truth at him. Do you know what it's like to share a bed with someone you know is destroying you? To smile at them over breakfast when you want to throw the coffee pot at their head?" Margaret laughed, but it was understanding rather than amused. "Oh, honey, I know exactly what that's like. I spent 3 years sleeping next to my ex, smiling during the day and crying in the shower at night. But here's the thing, that anger, that rage you're feeling, don't suppress it. Don't try to make it go away. Let it fuel you. Let it make you sharp. Let it burn away every soft feeling you have left for him. Because the day you confront him, you're going to need every ounce of it." She was right. I channeled my fury into my preparation. Every condescending word from Tom, every pitying look from our friends, every moment I had to bite my tongue, I stored it all away, building a reservoir of righteous anger that would sustain me when the time came. At night, I'd lie next to Tom, listening to him sleep, and I'd mentally rehearse what I would say to him when the moment came. I'd imagine his face when he realized I'd been playing him all along. The thought sustained me through the worst moments, when I wanted to break down and scream. Rebecca's team worked fast. Within 2 weeks, they'd traced Tom's financial trail. The numbers were staggering. Over the course of 5 years, he'd systematically moved nearly $3 million into offshore accounts. Money from our real estate business, money from investments we'd made together, money that was supposed to be our retirement security. The team consisted of 3 forensic accountants, a grim trio of number crunchers who'd made careers out of uncovering hidden assets. They worked out of Rebecca's office, their laptops and spreadsheets spread across the conference room table, hunting through financial records like archaeologists sifting through layers of history. "The thing is," Rebecca explained, spreading out financial documents across her conference table, "he's been clever about it. Small amounts over time, structured to avoid triggering any reporting requirements. No single transfer over $10,000 to avoid IRS reporting. Multiple shell companies to obscure the trail. Wire transfers disguised as business expenses. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd never spot it." She pulled out a particular set of documents. But here's where he got sloppy. She spread out the incorporation papers for Bennett Holdings, LLC. He set up this shell company 6 months ago, and according to the incorporation documents, you're listed as a co-owner. I stared at the papers, at a signature that looked remarkably like mine, but that I'd never written. But I never signed anything. "Exactly," Rebecca said, her smile sharp and satisfied. "Forgery, which is a federal crime. He forged your signature to create this company. probably planning to use it to funnel more money offshore. But what he doesn't realize is that as a co-owner, even an unwitting one, you have every legal right to access the company's assets. All of them. She pulled out more documents. And here's the beautiful part. He used this company to purchase the commercial property on Cedar Street. Prime real estate, worth about $800,000. And it's in both your names, which means we can freeze it, take control of it, and sell it, along with everything else. The trap was set. All we needed was the right moment to spring it. That moment came 3 weeks before the charity gala. Tom announced at dinner that he'd made a significant investment decision. "I've decided to liquidate some of our properties," he said casually, cutting into his steak. We were having dinner at home, pan-seared filet mignon, roasted asparagus, a bottle of expensive Bordeaux, the kind of meal Tom considered his due. "The market's good right now, and I think it's smart to move into more liquid assets." "Which properties?" I asked, keeping my voice mild and curious. My heart was pounding, but I kept my hands steady as I cut my own steak. "The Michigan Avenue building and the 2 rental properties in Lincoln Park." "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm handling all the details. You don't need to stress about any of it." The Michigan Avenue building alone was worth over $1 million. The Lincoln Park properties were worth another $600,000. If he sold them and moved the money offshore, it would be much harder to recover. This was his endgame, one final massive theft before. "What? Divorce? Disappearance?" "That sounds smart," I said, taking a sip of wine. The Bordeaux was rich and complex, wasted on this moment. "I trust your judgment." His smile was smug, satisfied. "I know this has been hard for you, not being involved in the business decisions anymore. But I think you'll agree, I've been doing a good job managing things." "Absolutely," I agreed, and the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, after Tom fell asleep, I crept out of bed and called Rebecca from the guest bathroom. "He's accelerating. We need to move." "Agreed," she said, and I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. It was nearly midnight, but she sounded wide awake. "I'm filing the paperwork tomorrow. But Clara, are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your life is going to change in ways you can't fully anticipate." I thought about the woman I'd been 3 months ago, the woman who'd believed her husband's lies, who'd doubted her own mind. I thought about all the years I'd spent building our life together, believing we were partners. I thought about the careful way I'd chosen those marble counters for the kitchen, picked out furniture for every room, hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings, all to build a home for a man who'd been planning to rob me blind. And I thought about the shoebox hidden in the closet, full of evidence of his calculated betrayal. I thought about his notebook, with its clinical notes about destroying my credibility. I thought about every lie, every manipulation, every moment he'd looked me in the eye and made me doubt my own sanity. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's burn it all down." The next morning, while Tom was at his office, Rebecca filed an emergency motion to freeze all of our joint accounts and assets. She argued that there was evidence of fraud, forgery, and financial abuse, and that immediate action was necessary to prevent the dissipation of marital assets. By noon, the court had granted a temporary restraining order. By 3 p.m., Tom's access to Bennett Holdings LLC had been revoked, and I'd been installed as the sole authorized representative. And by 5 p.m., when Tom tried to transfer funds to finalize the property sale, he discovered that he no longer had access to any of our accounts. His phone call came at 5:47 p.m. I was at Margaret's house, surrounded by Rebecca and her team, and we all listened as his voice came through the speakerphone. Rebecca had recorded a transcript of his earlier phone calls, each one growing more desperate. This was number 4. "Clara, what the hell is going on? The bank is saying I don't have access to our accounts. There must be some mistake. This is insane." "There's no mistake, Tom," I said calmly. My voice was steady, clear, nothing like the uncertain woman I'd been pretending to be. I've taken control of our finances. All of them. There was a long silence. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to figure out his next move. In the background, I could hear his office, the muted sounds of traffic from Michigan Avenue, the hum of his computer. He was probably looking at his computer screen right now, staring at the locked accounts, watching his carefully constructed plan collapse. Sweetheart, I don't understand. Has someone been telling you things, putting ideas in your head? Is it that neighbor of yours, Margaret? I told you she was trouble. You know you can't trust. I found the shoebox, Tom. I found your notebook. I know everything. Another silence, longer this time. I imagined him sitting at his desk, his face draining of color, his mind racing through everything he'd hidden. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The gentle, patient tone was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. This was the real Tom, the one I'd never been allowed to see. You're not well, Clara. You're confused. You don't understand what you're looking at. We need to sit down and talk about this rationally. I can explain everything if you'll just— Oh, we'll talk, I said, cutting him off. At the gala, in front of everyone. I think it's time our friends heard the truth, don't you? I think they'd be very interested to know about your investment strategies and your offshore accounts. Clara, don't do this. You'll regret— I hung up before he could finish. My hands were shaking, but from adrenaline now, not fear. Margaret handed me a glass of wine, and Rebecca was already pulling up documents on her laptop. How do you feel? Rebecca asked, her eyes sharp and assessing. I took a breath, considering the question. I felt light, unburdened, like I'd been carrying a massive weight and had finally set it down. Like I can breathe for the first time in months. Good, Rebecca said, because things are about to get very messy. He's going to fight. He's going to try every tactic he can think of. Are you prepared for that? I thought about what was coming. The lies, the accusations, the desperate attempts to regain control. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. The 2 weeks before the gala were tense. Tom tried everything. Threats, promises, tears, rage. He showed up at the house demanding to talk, pounding on the door until the neighbors started watching. He called Sarah, trying to convince her I was having some kind of breakdown, that I'd been manipulated by evil influences. He even went to our friends, painting himself as the concerned husband dealing with a mentally ill wife who'd been taken advantage of by predatory lawyers. But Rebecca had prepared for all of it. She'd already reached out to Sarah with documentation of Tom's fraud, bank statements, the notebook, the forensic accounting reports. She'd sent letters to our close friends explaining the situation and providing evidence. She'd even arranged for Dr. Morrison to provide a formal statement about my perfect mental health, along with statements from Dr. Martinez documenting my cognitive clarity. The narrative Tom had spent months building was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sarah came to see me the day before the gala. She walked into the house we'd raised her in, and I could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. She was still wearing her work clothes, the navy suit and sensible heels, but she looked disheveled in a way I'd never seen her. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking. She stood in the foyer, the space where she'd posed for prom photos and where we'd taken pictures on her wedding day 5 years ago. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have questioned him. I should have believed you when you seemed uncertain at lunch that day. I could see something was wrong, but I believed him when he said you were struggling." "Don't," I interrupted, pulling her into a hug. She felt small in my arms, though she was taller than me now. "He fooled everyone. He's been planning this for years. You couldn't have known. He's your father. You wanted to believe the best of him." "But I'm a lawyer," she said against my shoulder, her voice muffled. "I'm supposed to spot this kind of thing. I prosecute corporate fraud, and I couldn't see it happening in my own family. What does that say about me? It says you're human, I said firmly, pulling back to look at her face. It says you loved your father and trusted him. That's not a character flaw, Sarah. That's what family is supposed to be. He's the one who broke that trust, not you. That night, Sarah stayed over. We sat up late drinking wine and going through old photo albums, something we hadn't done in years. Looking at pictures of our family, Tom grinning at Sarah's college graduation. Tom and me on our 25th anniversary trip to Paris. Tom holding Sarah when she was just a baby, her tiny body cradled in his arms. Was any of it real? Sarah asked, staring at a photo of her parents on their wedding day. I looked young in the picture, impossibly young, wearing my mother's veil and carrying white roses. Tom looked handsome and confident, his hand on my waist, both of us smiling like we had all the answers. Did he ever really love you? Love us? I thought about that question for a long time. It was past 2 a.m. and we were on our second bottle of wine. I think he did, in his way. I think the man who held you when you were born and stayed up all night when you had the flu, I think he loved us. But somewhere along the line, money became more important than people. And once that happened, we became obstacles instead of partners. We became things to be managed instead of people to be cherished. What are you going to do tomorrow? She asked. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Tom Bennett really is. The charity gala was held at the Four Seasons, in a ballroom that glittered with crystal chandeliers and the wealth of Chicago's elite. I arrived alone, wearing a red dress that Sarah had helped me pick out. Not the subdued navy or black I usually wore to these events, but a bold, vibrant red that announced I was done being invisible. The dress was fitted, elegant, expensive. Sarah had taken me shopping, insisting I needed armor for what was coming. You need to look powerful, she'd said, pulling dresses off racks with the determination of a general selecting weapons. You need to walk in there looking like the woman you are, not the woman he tried to make you. Tom was already there, surrounded by friends and colleagues. He was being honored tonight for his generous contributions to the Children's Hospital, contributions made with money he'd stolen from our joint accounts. He was wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray Armani, and he looked every inch the successful philanthropist. When he saw me walk in, his face went pale. He'd probably hoped I wouldn't come, that I'd stay home and let him spin whatever story he wanted. But here I was, and I'd brought Sarah as my date. Behind us, Margaret entered with Rebecca, both dressed to kill and looking like they were ready for war. The dinner portion of the evening passed in a blur of awkward small talk. I sat at our usual table with the Caldwells, the Pattersons, and several other couples we'd socialized with for years. They were all treating me with exaggerated gentleness, clearly uncertain about what to believe. They'd received Rebecca's letters, but Tom had been working the phones, telling his version. They were waiting to see which story would win. Clara, dear, you look wonderful, Janet Patterson said carefully, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. That's such a bold dress for you. Thank you, Janet, I said pleasantly. I decided it was time for some changes in my life, starting with my wardrobe. Tom sat across from me, barely touching his food. The gala meal was the usual, chicken or fish, predictable and expensive. Every few minutes he'd glance at me, trying to gauge my intentions. I just smiled and made small talk, waiting for my moment. It came during the awards portion of the evening. The hospital administrator, a cheerful man named David Chen, took the stage and began his introduction. Our next honoree is someone who exemplifies the spirit of philanthropy. Over the past 5 years, Tom Bennett has donated over $500,000 to our pediatric wing. His generosity has directly impacted the lives of countless children and families. Please join me in welcoming Tom to the stage. The room erupted in applause. Tom stood, buttoning his jacket, preparing to give the speech I'm sure he'd rehearsed. He was good at this. The public performance, the humble smile, the carefully crafted image of generosity. But before he could take more than 2 steps, I stood up. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "before Tom accepts this award, I have something I'd like to share." The room went silent. Tom froze. The hospital administrator looked confused, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You see," I continued, pulling a folder from my bag, "I've recently discovered something interesting about my husband's generous donations. They were made with money stolen from our joint accounts he systematically drained while convincing everyone that I was mentally incompetent." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Tom's face went from pale to red. I could see the veins in his temples pulsing. "Clara, sit down," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Tom, I'm embarrassing you, and I'm just getting started." I walked toward the stage, and Sarah stood too, flanking me in support. Margaret and Rebecca followed, creating a phalanx of women who refused to be silenced. For months, my husband has been telling anyone who would listen that I was losing my memory, that I couldn't be trusted, that I was confused and unreliable. He did this systematically, deliberately, to destroy my credibility. And why? So he could steal nearly $3 million and hide it in offshore accounts. I reached the stage and spread the documents across the podium. These are bank statements, wire transfers, records of every dollar he moved, every account he opened in secret, every lie he told. And this, I held up Tom's notebook. This is his planning journal, where he documented his strategy for gaslighting me. The room was in complete chaos now. People were standing, shouting questions, pushing toward the stage to see the documents. Tom stood frozen in the middle of it all, his carefully constructed image crumbling around him. "The money he donated to this hospital?" I continued, my voice rising above the din. "It was my money. Money I earned through my work in our real estate business. Money that was supposed to secure our retirement. And he spent it buying awards and accolades while plotting to leave me with nothing." I turned to look at him directly. "You thought I was weak. You thought I'd just accept whatever you told me. You thought you could steal my life right out from under me, and I'd be too confused and too scared to fight back." The room had gone silent again, everyone hanging on my words. "That was your biggest mistake." Tom finally found his voice. "This is insane. She's having a breakdown. Someone call..." "Call who, Tom? Dr. Morrison? Who's already provided documentation of my perfect mental health? The forensic accountants who've traced every dollar you stole? Or maybe Rebecca Torres, my lawyer, who's right over there with a court order freezing all of your assets?" I gestured to where Rebecca stood near the back of the room, holding up the legal documents like trophies. Tom's legs seemed to give out. He sank into the nearest chair, his face in his hands. For a moment, he looked like what he was, a caught thief, a con man exposed, a man who'd gambled everything on his wife's silence and lost. I turned to the hospital administrator, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I apologize for disrupting your event, but I thought you should know where those donations really came from. I've arranged with my lawyer to ensure the hospital can keep the money. It's going to a good cause, after all. Consider it my donation, not his. And I'll be making another donation of equal size in my own name." The aftermath was a blur. People surrounded me, some offering support, others demanding explanations. Sarah stayed by my side, her arm around my waist, and Margaret pushed through the crowd to reach me. "That," Margaret whispered in my ear, "was absolutely magnificent." Tom tried to leave, but Rebecca intercepted him at the door with a process server. I watched from across the room as he was handed divorce papers and a lawsuit for fraud and financial abuse. His hands shook as he read the documents, the papers trembling so badly he could barely focus on them. Later, much later, after most of the crowd had dispersed and the hotel staff was cleaning up, Tom approached me one final time. Sarah moved to block him, but I shook my head. We needed this conversation, this ending. "What do you want, Tom?" He looked old suddenly, older than his 65 years. The confident, charismatic man I'd married was gone, replaced by someone hollow and desperate. His shoulders slumped, his expensive suit hanging wrong on his frame. "How did you do it?" he asked quietly. "How did you hide all of this from me? How did I not see it coming?" I almost laughed. The absurdity of it, him asking how I'd deceived him after everything he'd done. "The same way you hid your theft from me." I lied. I pretended. I became someone else. Turns out, I learned from the best. "Clara, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we've been together for 38 years. That has to count for something. We can go to counseling. I can make this right." I looked at him, this man I'd shared most of my life with, and felt nothing but a distant sadness. It did count for something. It counted enough that I tried to understand, tried to make excuses for you, tried to believe that I was the problem. But you know what? Those 38 years are exactly why this hurts so much. You didn't just steal money, Tom. You stole my sense of reality. You made me doubt myself in the most fundamental way possible. You made me question my own mind. And that's unforgivable. "So, what happens now?" he asked, and I heard genuine fear in his voice. "Now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. The divorce will be finalized in a few months. The lawsuit will probably take longer. You'll likely face criminal charges for the forgery and fraud. And you'll have to live with the knowledge that you destroyed our family for money you'll never get to spend." I picked up my bag and turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Tom? That award you were supposed to get tonight? I'm having it melted down. I'm going to use the metal to make a sculpture. I'm thinking something about truth and consequences. I'll make sure to credit you as the inspiration." The divorce proceedings were brutal but straightforward. Tom's lawyer tried to argue that I'd stolen the money, that I was the one who'd committed fraud, that I'd manufactured evidence. But Rebecca destroyed every argument with documentary evidence. The notebook was particularly damning. There was no explaining away Tom's own words documenting his scheme. The criminal charges came next. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 40s named Maria Rodriguez, who told me that financial abuse cases against elderly women were often hard to prove because the victims were too embarrassed to come forward. "But you," she said admiringly, reviewing the case file in her office. "You documented everything. You built an airtight case. This is going to trial, and we're going to win." And they did. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in that courtroom every single day, watching Tom's facade crumble piece by piece. The courtroom was one of those old Chicago buildings with high ceilings and dark wood paneling, the kind that makes you feel the weight of justice bearing down. I sat in the front row, Sarah on one side and Margaret on the other, a wall of support that never wavered. Tom's lawyer was a slick man named Jeffrey Hammond, all expensive suits and rehearsed outrage. He tried every defense in the book. On the first day of testimony, he stood before the jury, 12 ordinary people who would decide Tom's fate, and painted a picture of a confused elderly woman who'd misunderstood her husband's well-intentioned financial management. "My client," Hammond said, gesturing toward Tom with practiced sympathy, "is a devoted husband who spent 38 years caring for his wife. When he noticed Clara Bennett beginning to struggle with memory issues, he did what any loving spouse would do. He stepped in to protect her from the stress of financial management. And for this kindness, he's being accused of crimes he never committed. It was a good performance. I'll give him that. But Rebecca was better." When it was her turn, Rebecca stood before that same jury and methodically destroyed Hammond's narrative. She called the forensic accountants first, 3 serious professionals who walked the jury through every hidden account, every forged signature, every carefully structured transfer designed to avoid detection. They showed spreadsheets, bank statements, wire transfer records. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. Then came Dr. Morrison, who testified that he'd examined me just 2 months ago and found absolutely no signs of cognitive decline. "Mrs. Bennett's mental acuity is exceptional for someone of any age," he said firmly. Her memory, reasoning, and decision-making capabilities are all well within normal ranges, actually above average in several areas. Dr. Martinez followed, bringing my file from the support group. I documented Mrs. Bennett's cognitive function every week for 2 months, she testified. At no point did I observe any memory deficits, confusion, or impairment. In fact, her recall of events and details was remarkably precise. Hammond tried to discredit them, suggesting they'd been coached or paid off. But their credentials and professionalism spoke for themselves. The most powerful testimony, though, came from Margaret. She took the stand on the 8th day of the trial, and I watched Tom's face as she was sworn in. He looked nervous. He knew what was coming. Rebecca walked Margaret through her own experience with financial abuse, establishing her expertise. Then she asked the key question. Ms. Chen, in your professional and personal experience, can you describe the pattern you observed in Mrs. Bennett's case? Margaret turned to face the jury directly. What Tom Bennett did to Clara is textbook financial abuse combined with gaslighting. It's a systematic approach. First, you isolate the victim by destroying their credibility. You tell small lies about their memory, their capabilities. You get others to witness these concerns. You create doubt in the victim's own mind. And then, while they're questioning their own reality, you take everything. She pulled out academic articles, case studies, statistical data. She explained the psychology behind it, the manipulation tactics, the long-term effects on victims. By the time she finished, 2 jurors were in tears. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Tom's own testimony. Hammond put him on the stand on day 10, hoping his charm and apparent sincerity would sway the jury. Tom wore a humble expression, spoke in soft tones, and played the role of the misunderstood husband perfectly. I love my wife, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Everything I did to protect her. When I saw her struggling with her memory, I was terrified. My own mother died from dementia, and the thought of Clara going through that. He trailed off, dabbing at his eyes. It was convincing. Almost. But then Rebecca stood up for cross-examination, and everything changed. Mr. Bennett, she said, her voice calm and steady, you testified that you were trying to protect your wife. Is that correct? Yes, Tom said firmly. Then, can you explain this? Rebecca held up the notebook, his notebook, with his handwriting. This is your handwriting, correct? Tom's face went pale. Yes. But can you read this entry for the jury, the one dated April 1st? Tom's hands trembled as he took the notebook, transferred another $50 US to offshore account. C remains completely unaware of total assets. His voice was barely audible. That doesn't sound like protection, does it, Mr. Bennett? That sounds like theft. And this entry? She flipped to another page. March 22nd. Read it. Please. Told Janet P. about C's supposed episode getting lost. Story spreading through social circle, credibility established. Supposed episode, Rebecca repeated. Not Clara's episode. Supposed episode. Because it never happened, did it? You made it up. You fabricated these stories to destroy your wife's credibility. This isn't love, Mr. Bennett. This is calculated abuse. Tom tried to explain, tried to claim the notebook was taken out of context, that he was just keeping notes. But with each question, Rebecca tightened the noose. She went through entry after entry, showing the jury the progression of his plan, the cold calculation behind every move. By the time she was done, Tom was sweating, stumbling over his words, his carefully constructed image completely shattered. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they came back, I held Sarah's hand so tightly my fingers went numb. The foreman stood, a woman in her 50s who'd maintained a stern expression throughout the trial. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation of an elderly person, we find the defendant guilty. Tom dropped his head into his hands. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but Tom shrugged it off. Across the courtroom, I felt something inside me finally release, a tension I'd been carrying for months, maybe years. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Justice Catherine Walsh, didn't mince words at sentencing. Mr. Bennett, you exploited the trust of your wife of 38 years. You systematically destroyed her credibility and stole nearly $3 million. You preyed on societal prejudices about aging and memory to cover your crimes. This court finds your actions particularly egregious because of the intimate relationship you abused. She sentenced him to 5 years, though he'd likely serve less with good behavior. More importantly, she ordered him to repay every dollar he'd stolen with interest and penalties, a total of over $7 million. But the money, I discovered, meant less to me than I'd expected. What mattered was that I'd fought back, that I'd refused to be a victim, that I'd taken back control of my life. Sarah and I grew closer than we'd ever been. She left her corporate law job and joined Rebecca's firm, specializing in cases of financial abuse. "Mom," she told me over coffee one morning, "watching you fight back changed how I see everything. I was working for corporations, helping them protect their assets. But what you did, fighting for yourself, refusing to be erased, that's the kind of law I want to practice. I want to help other women the way Rebecca helped you." I sold most of our real estate holdings and used the money to start a nonprofit. The Clara Bennett Foundation provides legal assistance and support to elderly women facing financial abuse. Our office is in a renovated brownstone on the north side. Ironic, given that my own brownstone was where my nightmare began. But this space feels different. It's filled with hope instead of deception. We started small, just me and 2 part-time staff members. But word spread quickly. Within the first month, we had 15 women reach out for help. Some had stories eerily similar to mine, husbands who'd spent years undermining their credibility while draining accounts. Others faced different variations of financial abuse, adult children stealing from elderly parents, caregivers exploiting vulnerable seniors, romantic partners running elaborate cons. Each woman who walked through our doors brought her own pain, her own story, her own strength she didn't know she had. I sat with them, listened to them, and saw myself reflected in their eyes, the confusion, the shame, the fear. And then I watched as that fear transformed into determination. We've helped over 200 women in the first year alone, and that number keeps growing. Each woman who walks through our doors is another life saved, another person who refused to be silenced. Some days are harder than others. The stories can be devastating, the system frustratingly slow. But then I'll get a phone call from a woman who's just won her case, or I'll see one of our clients at a foundation event, laughing and free, and I remember why this matters. Sarah joined the board of directors, bringing her legal expertise and fierce advocacy. Rebecca serves as our lead counsel, handling the most complex cases pro bono. And Margaret became the foundation's director of education, developing programs to help women recognize the warning signs of financial abuse before it's too late. Margaret became one of my closest friends. We meet every week for coffee, comparing notes on our respective journeys from victim to survivor. She's writing a book about financial abuse, and I've agreed to contribute a chapter. The working title is Erased No More: Financial Abuse and the Women Who Fight Back. Sometimes we laugh about it, dark humor about our respective ex-husbands and their pathetic attempts at control. "Remember when my ex told everyone I was too hysterical to understand money?" Margaret will say, rolling her eyes. "And now I have a PhD in financial psychology." The irony is delicious. Other times we cry, mourning the years we lost and the trust that was broken. Those conversations happen late at night, over wine, when the protective armor we wear during the day gets too heavy to maintain. We grieve for the women we were, the marriages we thought we had, the futures we'd imagined that will never exist. And me? I'm 63 now, and I've never felt more alive. I bought a small condo overlooking Lake Michigan, just enough space for me and my growing collection of art. The condo is everything my old house wasn't. Compact, modern, mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows face east, so I wake up to sunrises over the water. The first morning I woke up there, I stood at those windows with my coffee and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. I've started painting, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. Tom always dismissed it as a hobby, something frivolous. "Leave art to the artists," he'd say with that condescending smile. But now, with no one to judge or diminish my interests, I've discovered I'm actually quite good. My work is dark and cathartic, full of broken things being rebuilt into something stronger. Shattered mirrors reflecting new faces, chains melted down and reformed into wings, cages transformed into sculptures of freedom. I had my first gallery showing last month. A small gallery in Wicker Park took a chance on me, and I couldn't believe it when they said yes. Opening night, I stood in that gallery surrounded by my work, and I felt more vulnerable than I had in the courtroom. These paintings were pieces of my soul, my trauma, my healing, all on display for strangers to see and judge. But then, Sarah came, and Margaret, and Rebecca, and dozens of women from the foundation. They filled the gallery with warmth and support, and 3 of my paintings sold that night. We drank cheap wine and celebrated survival, and one woman, a foundation client who'd just won her own case against her abusive son, stood in front of my painting titled Reconstruction and wept. "That's me," she whispered. "That's what I'm doing, reconstructing myself from the pieces he left behind." That moment made everything worthwhile. I'm dating too, which feels absurd and wonderful at the same time. Nothing serious yet, but it's nice to go to dinner with someone who sees me as a whole person, not a convenient target for manipulation. His name is Richard. He's a retired teacher, and he makes me laugh. That's enough for now. Maybe it will become more, maybe it won't. For the first time in my life, I'm okay with not knowing what comes next. But here's what I want you to understand, what I need you to hear. This can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how successful you've been, how long you've been together. Financial abuse, gaslighting, manipulation, these things thrive in the shadows of trust and love. I spent months questioning my own sanity because someone I loved used that love against me. And I'm not unique. Thousands of women and men face similar situations every year. The statistics are staggering. Over 12,000 elderly victims reported cryptocurrency scams alone last year. Investment scams cost seniors over $2 billion annually. And those are just the cases that get reported. How many more people are suffering in silence, too ashamed or too confused to ask for help? So here's what I need you to do. I need you to look at your own life with clear eyes. Ask yourself, are there financial decisions being made without your input? Are you being excluded from conversations about your own money? Is someone suggesting you're too old, too forgetful, too emotional to handle your own affairs? Those are red flags. They're warning signs that something is wrong. And if you see them, trust your instincts. Don't let anyone convince you that your concerns are invalid. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own mind. Document everything. Keep records. Tell someone you trust, a friend, a family member, a lawyer. Don't face this alone. And if you're reading this and thinking about someone else, a parent, a friend, a neighbor, who might be in this situation, reach out, ask questions, offer support. You might be the lifeline they need. Financial abuse is a crime. Gaslighting is emotional torture, and no one, regardless of how long they've been married, how old they are, or how much they think they deserve it, should have to endure it. I'm sharing my story because I want you to know that it's possible to fight back. It's possible to reclaim your life, even when everything seems lost. It's possible to go from being a victim to being a survivor to being a warrior. But it requires courage. It requires support. And it requires the willingness to believe in yourself, even when someone you love is trying to convince you that you're wrong. I almost lost everything: my money, my reputation, my sense of self. But instead, I found something more valuable: my strength, my voice, my power. And you can too. So I'm asking you now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, if my story resonates with you, share it. Talk about it. Start conversations about financial abuse and elder exploitation. Make it something we talk about openly, not something we whisper about in shame. If you faced something similar, tell your story. You don't have to use your real name. You don't have to share every detail. But your voice matters. Your experience matters. And you might just save someone else from going through what we went through. Leave a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're listening to this. Let's create a community of people who refuse to be silent. Hit that like button if you agree that no one deserves to be manipulated or abused. Subscribe so you don't miss other stories like this one. And if you're in a situation right now where someone is trying to control you, gaslight you, or steal from you, please reach out for help. Contact a lawyer. Call a domestic abuse hotline. Tell someone you trust. You deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect and honesty. I know this was a long story, but these things take time to tell properly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, you're stronger than you think you are. You're smarter than anyone trying to manipulate you. And you have the power to change your story. Until the next time, take care of your heart. It's the only one you've got.